I recently visited an old Pennsylvania Academy classmate at his home in South Philadelphia.
Hi, my name's Joel Rundell. I'm a painter living in Philadelphia. I went to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts between 1976 and 1980, and I do mostly landscapes.
Joel Rundell and I graduated in 1980, and we both won traveling scholarships that allowed us to go to Europe for 3 months in that long ago summer. Since then, in his quiet and patient way, Joel has created a body of work that is as distinctive as anything done by our generation of Academy artists. Joel has concentrated on 2 subjects, but they share a theme.
Right now I'm doing them in the Woodland Cemetery, which is out in University City.
Before the cemetery paintings, he did industrial scenes. What drew you to the industrial parts of Philadelphia's subject matter?
I think it was the poetry of the decline. A lot of the smaller steel mills were going out of business, like the Bethlehem Steel, and just the general transition from an industrial Pennsylvania to a different kind of economy back then. And I had a feeling that a lot of these old factory buildings wouldn't be around anymore, and some of them aren't around anymore.
Joel, you mentioned the poetry of decline, and you're a very upbeat person, but all your paintings have that, the industrial decline and then cemeteries, the human decline. What is it about you that you can be a happy guy, but you like to see things that are going downhill?
I guess when you start to get older, you have a sense of your own mortality. I mean, a lot of us have lost our parents and start losing family members. And unless you're a person of some kind of religious conviction, this is a way for me to visually contemplate the transitory nature of life.
Are you one of those people with religious convictions?
No. That's why I do the paintings.
Okay, so what's going to happen to your paintings after you die?
My kitty cat is going to take good care of the paintings. I had a long talk with her, and she's promised not to scratch the paintings or damage them in any way. So,
but we got to get you in art museums before that happens. Joel, can you give me a quick introduction to each one of these paintings?
That's Bethlehem skyline from 1979. I don't really drive, so I took a train from the Reading terminal in Center City, Philadelphia, out to Bethlehem for a few weeks working on the preliminary sketch for the painting. I used Carb Orthello pastel pencils, which worked pretty good because they have a warm gray and a cold gray. That was the first painting I ever took to Ben Camahir for a critique in autumn of 1979. That painting was on my shite wall in 1980, and it was the first painting I ever felt confident enough to take to him for critique.
He liked it?
Yeah, he liked it.
There you go, you got your shite.
Yeah. This painting is a waterfront scene from 1983. I think I took a bus over the Penrose Avenue Bridge to get there. And I remember being dive-bombed by a red-winged blackbird who didn't want me sketching in that location. I think that painting won a second Benjamin Altman Prize in the National Academy of Design back in 1984, which was good because the money prevented me from being evicted from my studio apartment in the basement with no light and bugs. And this is Marcus Hook Playground. I think that's from 1988 or 1989. I like the contrast between the grimy industrial stuff and then the children's playground, having an elementary school located within the proximity of the oil refinery. Autumn and Marcus Hook. I worked on the drawing for this between 1986 and 1987. I also took a train out to the Marcus Hook train station, and this was a few hundred feet away from there, the Sun oil refinery. So this was a lot of fun to work on. I exhibited this in the 90th anniversary fellowship show in the Furness building back in 1987.
You usually don't put people in, but there are 2 little guys in this one. What made you decide to do that?
Just to give a little bit of perspective, probably, or scale as far as how tall the buildings were and stuff. They stood still long enough I could sketch them, so. And this painting was called Incinerator from 1982. on Delaware Avenue with the Ben Franklin Bridge on the right, an old Woody station wagon in the front. I don't think I ever exhibited this painting, but I remember trying to get into a new talent show at the Marion Locks Gallery in 15th and Walnut, and I didn't get in, so I was taking the painting out, and I remember bumping into Roswell Widener on the staircase, and he said something like, "Oh, don't worry, there'll be other shows." So he gave me like a little bit of encouragement, even though I didn't have the painting in the show. I think you were in that one.
I was, and we got to make it clear, Joel, the only reason you weren't in that show was not because you got rejected, but you missed the deadline for submitting the painting. You told me they really liked it, so tell me about the next one.
This was just called Marcus Hook from 1981. That was one of the first paintings I did after graduating from the Academy in 1980. I remember exhibiting this in a fellowship show at the Civic Center. Chris Nissen had a wonderful painting in that show as well, so that was fun. Philadelphia skyline. I did that on top of the Penrose Avenue Bridge back in 1984 when it was closed down for repairs. I was able to sneak up onto the bridge wearing a construction helmet and actually doing a sketch on top of the bridge over a period of a few weeks. So one of the crazy things you can do when you're in your 20s, but I think I would have vertigo if I tried that today. The vegetable garden. I was attracted to the contrast of all the grimy industrial stuff in the background and a place where the local community made an attempt to grow fresh fruits and vegetables during the summer. It was not too far from where I lived back then on 47th and Chester Avenue. Old Hickory, that was an actual whiskey distillery. Supposedly, if you drove over the Walt Whitman Bridge back then, there was kind of a foul odor from the distillery, but I don't remember any foul smells when I started painting this. It was from 1982 to 1983. All those buildings are long gone. The only thing that still exists in that scene is the Walt Whitman Bridge.
What are the stains coming out? Is that whiskey?
Yeah, that's whiskey. No, I'm not sure, just rust or something. And you can tell it's the early 1980s probably by the cars. This was called Ephemera. I think I titled it from a poem by W.B. Yeats. I was interested in his poetry back in 1995, and I remember buying a book of his poems. And this was kind of a switch for me. I started moving away from the industrial stuff, and I was quite taken by some of the old monuments in the Woodland Cemetery out in University City. And it was the first time I ever did anything with textural stuff. I built up a layer of paint on the relief part on the top and then the lettering. This painting is called Woodland Cemetery. It was the first one I ever did out in the woodlands. It's in the back part of the cemetery with a view of the Schuylkill River. That's another painting where I enjoyed the contrast between the graves in the foreground and then the industrial stuff in the background. Gibson Family Monument in the Woodland Cemetery. I painted that because of the old cemetery marker about this family. John Gibson designed the stained glass in Washington, D.C., but he had lost all four of his children in the mid to late 1800s. And I thought, what a tragedy for two parents to lose all four of their children. And infant mortality was obviously a lot worse back in the 1800s. Just the poetry of that, when you think about how do parents cope with something like that, that's what made me want to paint that. Tree and the Stars, that took a long time to do. I worked on that for almost 20 years because I was working full-time at a job and I can only paint on the weekends. And the tree has a relief of paint on the left that's 1 to 1.5 inches as an impasto, so it just took a long time.
When you said you just built up the paint to make texture, this can't be paint, is it?
Yeah. A layer of pure cobalt blue paint that I had built up over a period of time. And then after it was built up to about an inch layer, then I did the texture on the tree with smaller lots of paint on top of that. So it's all paint.
Why didn't you get the cheapest possible paint to get the bulk and then do a veneer?
Yeah, I probably spent $500 on cobalt blue doing this painting.
Oh my God, it's just magnificent.
Oh, thanks. Why it took me so long to do this painting, because I had to draw like every single branch and every single bud on every tree branch. So it was a long production, and I was only able to work on my days off from work, which was only 2 days. Because it's a winter scene, sometimes it would be too cold and windy to work, so 4 or 5 winters just trying to get the drawings done.
Joel, can you walk us through your process?
I'll usually visit a location and walk around until I find something that really catches my interest, and then I'll start a drawing on location using a landscape easel. I used to use pastel pencils on location. Now I'm just doing them in a soft graphite pencil. And depending on how complicated the subject matter is, it could take anywhere from a few months to half a year to do a finished drawing, and then I'll work on the painting in my studio based on the drawing. And I do use a ruler on location to make some measurements.
How do you work out the perspective?
Usually I'll just use like a traditional one-point perspective, like the painting I'm working on now, and I use a ruler and draw lines to that center vanishing point.
And yet some of yours have very complex two-point perspective.
I don't think I did any measurements, just sort of eyeballed as far as the perspective. So there's no set vanishing point.
Is it almost like the Japanese orthogonal perspective where you keep the receding lines more or less parallel?
Yeah, I'd say probably.
A quick aside for my viewers. If you look at this woodcut by Harunobu, you'll see what I mean about Japanese perspective. The receding lines of these boxes stay parallel as opposed to aiming towards vanishing points. Joel's garden painting really has a wonderful Japanese aesthetic, in my opinion. Your paintings seem mostly opaque. What medium do you use?
It's pretty much all liquid. I don't do much glazing, and then I just do a final coat of liquid as sort of a varnish. I don't really varnish the paintings or anything like that. I like liquid quite a bit, so that's what I've used for a long time.
The paintings are bigger than the drawings. How do you scale them up?
Well, I have a ruler. Usually I'll try and enlarge something maybe 1.5 to 2 times from the drawing to the oil painting, just to make things easy to measure and multiply.
This looks like something that Thomas Cromwell might have had under his pillow. So what is this for?
These I just use as etching needles. I do a dark underpainting. I don't use black out of the tube. This is a mixture of Winsor blue, green shade, and raw umber for an umber painting. And then after that's dry, I use the etching needles to draw the branches and the outlines of the details in the painting. So I'm just starting on this.
Good. So when do you think this painting will be done?
I would say late fall, early winter, because I just have hundreds of branches that I have to draw and paint. And I don't even actually paint the branches. I paint the space in between the branches.
How do you know a painting is done?
I just get tired of looking at it. And it's a long, involved process. Right now, I'm only doing one painting a year because of the detail and the amount of work it takes.
Your paintings remind me of the Precisionists to some extent. Were they an influence?
Yeah, I like Charles Sheeler quite a bit. I remember a book about Sheeler in the Pennsylvania Academy Library that I remember borrowing. And I remember actually revisiting that library in the 90s, and my name on the loan card was still there from 1977.
There's a blend of realism and abstraction. They're not hyper-realistic, and yet they're very detailed and descriptive.
You have to work out just the basic composition of the painting before you start to get into all the detail. That was one of the lessons we learned from Morris Blackburn, not to get into microscopic detail until you have a feel for the compositions.
Was he one of your more influential teachers?
Morris Blackburn was definitely one of my favorites for my first 2 years at the Academy. He was very good at teaching the basics of painting. I think he died in 1979 in my 3rd year, and I remember going to his funeral. But he was a wonderful teacher. Arthur DeCosta I also liked quite a bit. His painting demonstrations at the Academy were always well attended. He would talk about old master painting techniques. To listen to his lectures, you would think maybe 5 or 6 guys in the country know this kind of information.
They call Marcus Aurelius a philosopher king. I think of Joel Rundell as an historian painter. The past is a country he seems comfortable in. Our contemporary world, not so much. I see you're old school as far as TV goes.
Yeah. I'm very old school. I listen to cassette tapes from the 80s in my studio when I'm painting, and then I watch either DVDs or VHS tapes in the evening when I'm having dinner. So I'm the only person in Philadelphia that doesn't have a smartphone. I have a landline, so I'm very much old school, and I'm proud of it.
Very good. Your brain hasn't been warped. I saw echoes of the long ago everywhere in his house, starting with photos of the Rundell family going back generations. Looking at these log cabins, were you a pioneer child?
No, but my great-great-great-grandparents were.
And where is this?
It's near the Shiawassee River in Owasso, Michigan.
Joel, who's the guy with the largemouth bass or the muskie or whatever that fish?
That was my great-grandfather, Elton Rundell, 1870 to 1956. So I never met him. He attended school in Owasso, Michigan, up until the 8th grade in a one-room schoolhouse, and he ended up self-educated. He wrote poetry. He was an outdoorsman, a very interesting character.
Alton's son, Roy Rundell, was Joel's grandfather. Roy began a butter and eggs business with his brother Scott. At one point, they were selling 15,000 eggs a day and a ton of butter. As Roy explained it, you can't be behind the 8 ball when you sell Sweet Meadow butter.
That's a really old family photo from 1966. That's my dad, Gene Rundell, my mom, Marge Rundell, my brother and sister when she was a few weeks old. That's me there at 8 years of age. My parents were happily married for 61 years, and they were very supportive when I was going to the academy, so I always felt lucky to have had them as parents.
What did your dad do for a living?
He was a metallurgical engineer.
Did you ever consider going into metallurgy?
No. My dad grew up in Michigan, and my mom was from Reading, Pennsylvania.
Where did you grow up?
Lockport, New York, which is outside of Buffalo. I graduated high school in 1976, and this was a poster I did for the bicentennial when I was 17 years old.
What did I tell you? Even back then, Joel was an artist obsessed with history. And that interest in history comes out in other ways. Joel, you've been collecting various publications for years. What do you got?
I actually have a complete set of reprints of National Geographic magazine. It goes back to the very first National Geographic in 1888. A set of Art in America magazine, back when it was a really interesting magazine. No internet back then, so it was a good way to stay abreast of what was going on in the art world. Pennsylvania Academy school catalogs, exhibition catalogs, some annual exhibition catalogs that go back to the 1800s. Fascinating to look through. Some old National Academy of Design catalogs.
You have some Life magazines, I see.
So Life magazine's going from 1936 to 1972. It's pretty much a complete set during the war years, from November of 1936 to the end of World War II in 1945. Going through the collection and rereading them in the evening hours. It was really like a week-by-week time capsule of World War II history. This one was when World War II first broke out in September of 1939. America was very isolationist in 1939 when the war was breaking out, and it took people a while to realize what a horrible person Hitler was. 55 million people died during that conflict, and it's important, I think, to have a basic understanding of what happened in World War II. They're really wonderful to look through. The old photography, the old ads. Low price 1940 Plymouth.
Speaking of how things were cheaper back in the day, Joel showed me his student paint box.
These were all Grumbacher oil paints that I bought from the Academy School store in 1976. Some of them are still actually soft.
Do any of them have a price tag?
Yeah, $5.10 for a tube of paint. That's from Tawes, which was actually pretty expensive back then.
Yeah. How did you find out about the Academy?
Well, my uncle Bill Greenwood, my mom's younger brother, lived in Center City, Philadelphia on 16th Street. And I visited him a few times when I was in high school. My uncle encouraged me to go to the Academy, so I ended up applying, and I was accepted into the school back in 1976. He was a big help in my early years starting at the Academy and setting me up in Philly. After graduating in 1980, I ended up liking Philadelphia and staying in the city.
How do you remember the academy years? Was it a good time?
Yeah, wonderful. The enjoyment of the newly restored Furness building that had just reopened in, I think, April of 1976. Academy tuition was $650 a semester. We had a wonderful variety of older and younger instructors. They were all professional artists. I loved pretty much everybody on the faculty, even the ones that I didn't really study closely with. A great time to be a student back then.
And how about your fellow students?
I guess it's amazing the amount of really wonderful artists that graduated from the early 1980s. I don't want to start naming names, but you know who they are.
Yeah.
Just really a really wonderful group of artists back then.
Yep, I know who they are. And you, my friend, are right up there with the best of them. Oh, Joel, I wish I had known you better back in the day. You're just a peach of a guy.
Oh, thank you, Jim.
A final note to my beloved YouTube viewers. Thanks to Joel's insatiable desire to preserve important archives from the past, he and I might soon be cooking up something of interest to anyone who loves art history. Stay tuned.